Emilio Restrepo did not expect to spend his Thursday evening bleeding quietly onto the vinyl seat of a diner booth, held in place by the calm, unhurried authority of a 26-year-old waitress who had just pressed a steak knife against the inside of his wrist and told him, very softly, that she would open the vein if he moved. He didn't move. The Bluebell Diner sat at the cracked edge of the Garfield district in Chicago, wedged between a check-cashing place and a nail salon that had been out of business since 2019. It was the kind of place that smelled like old coffee and fryer grease, no matter what time of day you walked in, where the fluorescent lights buzzed at a frequency that gave certain people headaches, and where the pie case by the register was always half empty by 8 in the morning. The regulars called it the Bell. They'd been calling it that for 40 years. Nobody who ate there was in a hurry to be anywhere else. Magda worked the closing shift 5 nights a week. She was a big woman, broad-shouldered and heavy in the way that suggested not softness but density, the kind of body that took up space without apologizing for it. She was 26 years old, the daughter of a Ghanaian immigrant father and a Puerto Rican mother who had met at a community college in Pilsen. Married fast, and spent the next 20 years quietly holding together with very little money and enormous stubbornness. Magda had inherited the stubbornness. She had also inherited her father's hands, wide, thick-fingered, built for gripping, and her mother's refusal to flinch in the presence of men who thought size was the same thing as power. She wore a yellow uniform with a white apron and kept her hair pulled back so tight. It gave her a slight headache by the end of every shift. Her shoes were sensible and worn at the heel. She carried a small notepad in her apron pocket that she almost never used, because she had memorized every item on the menu the first week she started and had never forgotten an order since. She was not supposed to be remarkable. She was not supposed to be a problem. Emilio Restrepo had made the mistake of assuming that the people who were not supposed to be remarkable never were. He was 51 years old, though he looked 45 on a good day and 60 on a bad one. He had the kind of face that had been handsome once and still retained the architecture of it: sharp jaw, dark eyes, a nose that had been broken twice and set correctly both times. He wore a charcoal sport coat over a black shirt, and he never wore a tie, because a tie gave a man something to be grabbed by. He had learned that lesson in 1998 and never forgot it. Emilio ran the Restrepo organization, which was not called that by anyone except federal prosecutors and journalists. The people who worked for him called it the firm. The people who feared him, which was most of the Garfield district, the Logan Square corridor, and a significant portion of the near West Side, called it nothing at all. You didn't name the thing you were afraid of. Naming it made it more real. He had come to the Bluebell Diner because his associate, a man named Teller, who handled collections for the North Side routes, had stopped answering his phone 48 hours ago. Teller's last known location, according to the man who drove him, was a booth in the back of this diner, where he had gone to collect the November envelope from the owner, a tired Greek man named Spiros, who had been paying on time for 11 years. Teller had not come out. Spiros, when reached by phone, had developed a sudden and total inability to speak English. Emilio had decided to come himself, which was unusual. He did not typically make personal appearances at collection points, but something about the shape of the situation, the silence, the old man's sudden amnesia, made the skin at the back of his neck do a thing it had not done in a long time. He brought 2 men with him, Santos, who was loyal and fast, and a newer man called Bridges, who was large enough to change the emotional temperature of a room just by walking into it. They had arrived at 9:45, a few minutes before closing, and found the diner almost empty. A couple in their 60s splitting a slice of pecan pie, a young guy in a delivery jacket asleep over a cup of coffee, and one waitress wiping down the counter at the far end of the room, her back to the door. Emilio told Santos and Bridges to wait by the entrance. He walked to the counter himself. The waitress did not turn around. "We're closing in 15, she said, without looking up from what she was doing. "I'm not here to eat," Emilio said. "Then I really can't help you." She wrung out the cloth, folded it over the edge of the sink, and finally turned around. She looked at him the way you look at weather, not with alarm, just with the steady recognition of what it was. "You're Spiros's girl," Emilio said. It wasn't a question. He had done basic research on the walkover. The owner's daughter helped run the place. 20-something, lived above the restaurant. "I'm Spiros's employee," Magda said. "He's my landlord. You looking for him? He's not here. I'm looking for a man named Teller. Came in here 2 nights ago. Didn't leave." Magda picked up a fresh cloth and began polishing the pie case with an even, circular motion. "We get a lot of people in here. He would have stood out," Emilio said. "Big, red jacket, gold tooth, very bad personality. Still not ringing a bell." Emilio placed both hands flat on the counter. He was a man who understood the physics of intimidation, the lean forward, the dropped voice, the deliberate invasion of space. And he deployed these things now with the casual expertise of someone who had been doing it for 30 years. "Let me be direct with you," he said. "I am not a patient man, and this is not a conversation I want to have twice. A person in my employ came to this location and did not return. I would like to know why. You can make this very easy, or you can make it very difficult. I've found that people in your position usually prefer easy." Magda set down her cloth. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, not fear. He was certain of that almost immediately, but something more like calculation. The way a chess player looks at a board, not reacting but reading. "My position," she repeated. "Waitress, renter, person without a lot of options." She nodded slowly, as if she were considering the accuracy of that. Then she said, "Come with me," and turned and walked toward the back of the diner without waiting to see if he followed. He followed. He was not sure why. Afterward, he would spend a good deal of time thinking about that. The moment he chose to follow a big woman in a yellow uniform into the back of a Greek diner near midnight, and he would conclude that it was because she walked like someone who expected to be followed. Not the walk of someone trying to escape or someone scared. The walk of someone who had already decided what happened next. The back room was a narrow corridor between the kitchen and the emergency exit, lined with shelving units stacked with dry goods, economy-sized cans of tomato sauce, boxes of sugar and flour, a case of oil. It smelled like the inside of a pantry. There was a single bare bulb overhead and a metal folding table pushed against one wall. Magda stopped at the table and turned around. "Here's what I'm going to tell you," she said, her voice even and unhurried. "Your man Teller came in here 2 nights ago. He did not come to collect. He came to cause a problem. He told Spiros that the envelope wasn't enough anymore, that the rate was going up, and when Spiros said he couldn't pay more, Teller put a cigarette out on the back of his hand." Emilio's expression did not change. "That's an internal matter. Spiros is 72 years old, Magda said. He has a burn the size of a quarter on his hand. That's not an internal matter. That's a thing someone did to an old man who's been minding his own business in this neighborhood since before you ran anything here. Where is Teller now? In the walk-in cooler, Magda said. The silence that followed was very complete. "I'm going to need you to repeat that," Emilio said. "He's in the walk-in cooler, he's alive. He has a broken wrist, and he is zip-tied to the shelf that holds the dairy. I gave him a blanket because it gets down to 34 degrees in there, and I'm not trying to kill anybody." She paused. "His gold tooth is on the table behind you." Emilio turned. There was, in fact, a single gold tooth sitting on the folding table in a small pile like a dropped coin. He turned back. "You put one of my men in a cooler," he said. "He put a cigarette out on an old man's hand," Magda said. So yes, for the first time in a very long time, Emilio Restrepo did not know what to say. He stood in the narrow back corridor of a diner on the wrong side of midnight, looking at a woman who had outweighed him by a significant margin, and who was watching him with the patience of someone who had already played this conversation out in her head and was waiting for him to catch up. He made a decision. It was the wrong one. He stepped forward, closing the space between them, and reached for her arm with the intention of establishing the kind of physical control that had resolved dozens of situations like this over the past 30 years. It was reflex. It was also, as he was about to discover, a spectacular miscalculation. Magda did not step back. She stepped into him. She caught his reaching arm at the elbow, used his own forward momentum to rotate his wrist up and behind his back, and walked him into the shelving unit with a controlled and deliberate force that rattled the canned tomatoes and knocked a bag of flour half off the shelf. The movement had the fluency of something practiced. Not frantically, not in anger, but with the same unhurried efficiency she used to carry 4 full plates across a crowded diner floor without spilling a drop. Emilio's cheek hit cold metal shelving. His arm was pinned behind him at an angle that sent white pain shooting up to his shoulder. "I need you to stop," Magda said directly into his ear. Her voice had not changed register. "Because if Santos and Bridges come back here, things get very complicated for everyone." Emilio went still. He was suddenly aware of several things simultaneously. That his arm was being controlled by a woman who weighed 260 pounds, of what appeared to be predominantly muscle and stubbornness. That the 2 men he had brought with him were 20 feet away on the other side of a kitchen door, and that the thin, cool edge of something metallic had just been pressed against the underside of his wrist. "That's a paring knife," Magda said. "I've been cutting things for a living for 6 years. I know where the veins are." He believed her. "What do you want?" he said. His voice came out more level than he expected. "I want to have a real conversation," she said. "Without the reach? You ready for that?" "A beat." "Yes," he said. She released him. She stepped back. She kept the knife. Emilio turned around slowly, pressing his back against the opposite shelf, putting space between them. He straightened his jacket. His wrist ached. He looked at her. She stood there, thick and solid and entirely composed, the paring knife held loosely in her right hand, not threatening, just present. There was a small cut on her left forearm, he noticed, fresh, a few hours old, and her knuckles were slightly swollen on the right hand. Getting Teller into the cooler had apparently required some persuasion. "You did this yourself," he said. "Not a question. There was no one else in the back." "Spiros called me," she said. "I was upstairs. I came down. You came down," he repeated slowly. "And you put a grown man in a cooler." "He was not expecting me to do that," she allowed. That helped. Emilio looked at her for a long time. 30 years of reading people. Reading them in boardrooms and back alleys and courthouse hallways. Reading them terrified and defiant and bargaining. And he found that he could not get a solid read on this woman. There was no performance here. She was not pretending to be calm. She was simply calm, in the way that people who have survived genuinely difficult things tend to be calm. Not because nothing was frightening, but because they had already made their decisions and were now living inside them. "Sit down," he said, nodding at the folding table. "That's my line," she said. His mouth did something involuntary, not quite a smile. Close. "Fine." He pulled up the single folding chair. She remained standing, which put her at a height advantage, and he suspected she knew that. "Talk Spiros has been paying you for 11 years, Magda said. "He's never been late. He's never shorted you. He keeps his mouth shut and his hours consistent, and he doesn't cause problems. What Teller did to him was not business. It was cruelty. And you let a cruel man run your collections. Teller's discipline is an internal. I heard you the first time," she said, "and I'm telling you it's not. Because when your collectors are cruel, the whole neighborhood feels it. And when the whole neighborhood feels it, people stop being quiet." She paused. "I grew up on this block. My mother worked 2 jobs on this block. When I was 8 years old, Spiros used to put a piece of baklava under the counter for me every morning when she brought me in before school. You understand what I'm telling you? This is not abstract for me. Emilio studied her. You're protecting a diner, he said. I'm protecting people, she said. There's a difference. He leaned back in the chair. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at his own hands. He looked at the gold tooth on the table. Here's my problem, he said finally. I can't walk out of here and not address what happened. If I let a civilian hold one of my people without consequence, I don't get to call myself anything by next Tuesday. I know, Magda said. So what you did tonight has a cost. I know that too, she said. That's why I'm still here instead of gone. He looked at her sharply. You waited for me. I called the number Teller had in his phone. Whoever answered, I told them to send whoever was in charge. She shrugged, one shoulder, economical. I figured it was better to negotiate than to run. Running's exhausting, and it doesn't stick. For a full 30 seconds, Emilio Restrepo said nothing. He sat in a folding chair in the back of a diner on the north side of Chicago and looked at a waitress who had incapacitated his collector, called his organization directly, waited for him to arrive, put a knife to his wrist, and was now proposing to negotiate. He thought about the last time someone had surprised him this completely, and concluded it had been somewhere around 2009. What are your terms? He said. Magda reached behind her and retrieved a piece of paper from the shelf, a sheet of the diner's order paper, the kind with the little numbered lines. She had written on it in a narrow, precise hand. 1, she said. Teller does not come back to this block. I don't care who you send instead, as long as it's someone who knows the difference between business and entertainment. Emilio said nothing. She continued. 2. Spiros's rate stays where it is through the end of next year. He's 72. He's not going to have the diner much longer. Let him finish with dignity. She paused. 3. The other businesses on this block, the tailor 2 doors down, the woman who runs the laundromat on the corner, the pharmacy on Renner Street, they come under the same terms. No escalation. No stunts. Emilio tilted his head. You're negotiating for the whole block. Somebody has to. He studied her. Something in his chest was doing a thing he did not have immediate vocabulary for. And in exchange, I keep my mouth shut about Teller, she said. I keep Spiros's mouth shut. Nobody gets an anonymous tip. Nobody gets a reporter. She folded the order paper. And I will personally guarantee that this block stays quiet. No complaints. No attention. You do your business, I do mine, and everyone goes home. That's not a trade, Emilio said. Silence isn't a product I pay for. I have other ways to ensure silence. I know you do, Magda said. Her voice did not waver. But those ways take time, and they make noise, and they draw the kind of attention that interrupts the thing you're actually trying to do, which is run a profitable operation without interference. What I'm offering is cleaner. He looked at her. She looked back at him. He picked up the gold tooth from the table and turned it over in his fingers. Your father, he said. What did he do? Something shifted in her face, small, a tightening around the eyes. Not grief exactly. More like the involuntary reflex of someone who had learned to process grief in very small quantities so it didn't get in the way. He drove a city bus for 23 years, she said. And, a long pause. And before that, she said slowly, he was with the Okafor crew out of the South Side. Before I was born, before he met my mother, he moved numbers, he moved product. He got out when he could, and he stayed out for the rest of his life. Her jaw set. He was a very careful man. He taught me how careful looks. Emilio set the tooth down. What did careful look like? He said. It looked like knowing who's in the room before you walk in, she said. It looked like having an exit and having a backup exit. It looked like knowing where the leverage is before you need it. She met his eyes. I called your number because I knew you'd come. I knew you'd come alone or close to it, because a man at your level doesn't bring an army to a diner. I knew you'd try to establish physical control, because that's how this type of conversation usually goes. I had the paring knife in my apron for 40 minutes before you walked in the back." Silence. "You were ready for me," Emilio said. "I was ready," she confirmed. "Not for you specifically. For whoever they sent." He stood up. The motion was slow and deliberate, and he watched her track it without moving. He walked to the walk-in cooler at the end of the corridor and pulled the handle. The door swung open with a hiss of cold air. Teller was inside, exactly as described, zip-tied to a dairy shelf and wrapped in a diner blanket, his face the color of old chalk. He looked up when the door opened and his eyes went straight past Magda to Emilio, and then he looked at the floor. "Boss," he said, very quietly. Emilio studied him for a moment. Then he let the door swing shut. He turned around. Magda was watching him with the same steady attention she had maintained throughout. Her weight was balanced, the knife still loose in her hand, her expression as unreadable as a closed door. "Cut him loose when I leave," Emilio said. "Tell him he's done on the north side. He'll know what that means." "And the other things," she said. Emilio put on his jacket, smoothed the lapels. He was aware that he had come here to establish dominance, and was leaving having done the opposite, and that this would require certain adjustments in how he narrated the evening to himself and to others. He was also aware, more pressingly, that he was not angry about this in the way he expected to be. "I'll send someone new on Monday," he said, "someone who understands the distinction you made." "Between business and entertainment," she said. "Yes." He moved toward the door. "The other terms," she said again behind him. He stopped. He did not turn around immediately. He stood in the doorway of the back corridor with the kitchen smells and the cold air from the cooler and the distant buzz of the fluorescent lights. "I'll have my people draw up a letter of agreement," he said, "for Spiros, 1 year, stable rate. The other businesses on the block, same." He paused. "You'll have it by the end of the week. And Teller, done," he said. He walked out through the kitchen and through the diner and past Santos and Bridges without looking at either of them, and he pushed through the front door and out into the cold November night. The street was nearly empty. A cab rolled past. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing music from a second-floor window. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He went back inside. Magda was behind the counter again, her back to him, washing something in the sink. She heard the bell above the door and turned around. Her expression did not exactly change. It shifted slightly, a kind of recalibration. "You forgot something," she said. "No," he said. He walked to the counter and sat down on a stool. He placed both hands flat on the formica and looked at her. "I want to ask you something." She dried her hands on a towel and looked at him. "Okay, the calculation you made," he said. "Coming down here, handling Teller, waiting for me instead of running. You made every one of those decisions in," he paused. "What, an hour? About 45 minutes, she said. "Most people in that situation fall apart." "I know," she said. "Why didn't you?" She thought about it seriously, which he appreciated. She did not give him the quick answer, the deflection, the false modesty. "My father told me," she said at last, "that the difference between panic and action is whether you've thought about what you'd do before you need to do it. He used to make me walk through scenarios when I was a kid. Not because he thought I'd end up in them, just because he thought it was good for the mind. Like a fire drill." She looked at her own hands. "I've been running fire drills in my head since I was about 9 years old. Tonight wasn't that different from a drill, just louder." Emilio looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the men who worked for him, the ones who were competent, and the ones who were loyal, and the ones who were neither, and the ones who were both. And he thought about how rarely those qualities had anything to do with what a person looked like, or how much money they'd grown up with. "I have a problem," he said. "You have a lot of problems," she said. "A specific one." He turned the coffee cup in front of him on the counter, though it was empty. "I have a man in my operation, not a foot soldier. Someone with access to my routing information. He's been feeding my schedules to a competitor on the south side. I've been trying to identify him for 3 months, and I have not been able to do it." He paused. "You said your father was with the Okafor crew. Southside, before I was born," she said carefully. "The Okafor crew became the Renner organization in the 90s. The Renner organization is what's operating on the South Side today." She was very still. "I grew up around those people," she said. "I don't work for them. I know you don't. That's not what I'm asking." He looked at her steadily. "You know how they operate. You know their structure, how information moves through it, how they communicate. If someone inside my organization is passing information to Renner's people, there would be a method, a contact, a pattern. I've had 3 separate investigators look at it from my side. They can't find it." He paused. "I think someone needs to look at it from the other side." The diner was very quiet. The couple with the pecan pie had left. The delivery driver had woken up and gone. It was just the 2 of them, and the buzzing lights and the smell of old coffee. "That's a significant ask," Magda said. "I know what it is. If I start asking questions in that community, I become visible, and visible is dangerous." "I'm aware," he said. "That's why it's not a request. It's a proposition. If you help me find the source of the leak, the block gets permanent status. Not 1 year, permanent. No envelopes, no collections, no contact from anyone in my organization ever. Spyros keeps his diner until he decides to close it. The tailor, the laundromat, the pharmacy, untouched." Magda was quiet for a long time, long enough that the refrigerator unit behind the counter cycled on and off. "And if I find it," she said slowly, "and it leads somewhere dangerous, you bring what you find to me," he said, "and I handle what comes after. You stay clean. You can't guarantee that." "No," he said, "I can't. But I can guarantee that you'll have my word, and that my word in this city carries a certain weight." She looked at him for what felt like a very long time. "Why do you believe I can do this?" she asked. He looked back at her. He thought about her, walking him into a shelving unit with a practiced economy of movement that spoke of capabilities she had never been asked to use. He thought about the piece of order paper with the numbered terms, prepared and waiting. He thought about a 9-year-old girl learning fire drills from a careful man who had once lived on the wrong side of the city and spent the rest of his life teaching his daughter how to survive the inheritance of that world without being consumed by it. "Because," he said quietly, "I have spent 30 years learning how to identify who in a room is actually dangerous, and it has nothing to do with how big they are or what they're wearing or how loud they talk." He paused. "You are the most dangerous person I've been in a room with in a long time, and I've been in rooms with serious people." Something moved across her face. Not vanity, not satisfaction. Something older and quieter, the recognition of being seen accurately, which was different from being complimented. "Give me 2 weeks," she said. He nodded once and stood up. At the door he paused, his hand on the frame. He looked back at her, standing behind the counter of a dying diner at close to midnight in a yellow uniform with a steak knife still loose in her apron pocket. "Your name?" he said. "Just the first. Magda," she said. He repeated it once, silently, the shape of it. Then he walked out into the dark. 11 days later, Emilio received a text from an unknown number. It contained 4 things: a name, a location, a time, and a photograph that made his chest go very cold in the way that confirmed what he had already, in some part of himself, suspected. He sat with it for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and made the calls that needed to be made. And the following morning, the man whose name was in the text did not come into work. And no one who knew the right things to pay attention to was particularly surprised. That evening, he drove to the Bluebell Diner himself. He parked on the street and went inside. The place was nearly full for a Wednesday. Word had gotten around, apparently, that the pie was good, and every booth was occupied and there was a line at the counter. He found a stool at the far end and sat down. Magda came down the counter with a coffee pot and turned over his cup without asking. "You got my message," she said, filling it. I got your message." She set the pot down and looked at him. Her knuckles were bruised on the right hand again. He did not ask about it. "Was it enough?" she said. "More than enough," he said. She nodded. She reached under the counter and produced a folded piece of paper, another order sheet, and slid it across to him. He opened it. It was the same careful handwriting, 3 items numbered cleanly. He read them a second time. He looked up. "This is what you want," he said. "That's what I want." He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. He drank the coffee, which was not good. It was diner coffee, old and slightly burned, but he finished it anyway. He put cash on the counter, more than the coffee cost, and he stood up. "I'll have the agreement sent to Spiros by Friday," he said. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her for a moment, this woman in the yellow uniform in the too bright light of a neighborhood diner, wide and heavy, and utterly, completely herself. And he thought that he had come to this block 3 weeks ago to remind it who it belonged to, and was leaving with the growing, peculiar suspicion that the answer to that question was considerably more complicated than he had assumed. He put on his coat. "Friday," she said again, to make sure. "Friday," he confirmed, and walked out, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk with his hands in his pockets, and looked up at the windows of the diner where the light was warm and yellow, and people were eating pie, and he thought that the Garfield district was, after all, not a place where someone like him had expected to keep coming back to. He came back the following Tuesday anyway, and the Tuesday after that.